So yes, it is true. This has come forward that Marianne Williamson is apparently, or has apparently, sought an exploratory committee. Let's get into it. Now, this is coming from Breitbart News here. Let's go ahead into that article. Make this a little bit bigger for the peeps in the back. All right. Report Marianne Williamson preparing 2024 primary challenge against Joe Biden. Here we go. Marianne Williamson, a former 2020 Democrat presidential candidate, is preparing to launch a primary challenge against President Joe Biden's expected 2024 re-election campaign. According to reports, I'll make this a little bit larger because it's a little bit, the font's a little bit smaller. Puck's News' Tara Palmieri reported that Williamson spoke out against corporate Democrats and the need to challenge Biden during a party in LA last month. Williamson has already put out feelers to donors, according to Palmieri's sources. Further, Williamson has secured an exploratory committee campaign tab on Act Blue, the top Democrat fundraising apparatus. So let me explain to people who are not familiar. Typically, when someone is about to, announce that they're going to run for an office, they will secure an exploratory committee. That's usually the first indicator that this person is most likely going to run if they're doing all of that. Palmieri reported she has visited New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Iowa before the decision to nix Iowa from the primary lineup. She's already trying to build an operation in South Carolina where staffers are reaching out to former Bernie Sanders alumni to see if they're game. Williamson declined to comment. Although Biden has not officially launched his re-election campaign, he has consistently signaled that he plans to seek re-election in 2024. The Biden family fully supports a 2024 re-election campaign, a senior White House advisor recently told Fox News. As the president, he has said he intends to run for re-election. That is something both Dr. Biden and the family fully support. Biden is expected to make his decision in the coming weeks. That is according to White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain. I expect it shortly after the holidays, but I expect the decision will be to do it. Currently, the only declared candidate running in 2024 is former President Donald Trump. Williamson will be placed in an unusual position if she follows through and launches a primary campaign against the incumbent Democrat president. However, reports about her 2024 campaign come amid declining Democrat support for Biden. A recent USA Today Suffolk University poll found that the amount of Democrats who want Biden to run for a second term has fallen from 45% down to 40%. That poll has also found that less than a quarter of Americans, 23%, want to see him run for re-election in 2024. Biden's declining numbers in the poll, taken 1 month after midterm elections, comes after several Democrat politicians refused to say if they would support a Biden 2024 candidacy when questioned on the midterm campaign trail. Let's go on a little bit here. Moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin to progressive firebrands like AOC have all stayed silent on Biden's 2024 hopes. You know who hasn't? Ro Khanna hasn't. Ro Khanna said he fully supports Joe Biden's re-election. Let's go on. Skip over that part here. We get back to the Marianne part. In the 2020 cycle, Williamson did not make it to the Democratic primaries. Instead, she suspended her campaign in January 2020 amid Democrat National Committee changes to the debate threshold, making it harder for her to qualify for the debates. She went on to endorse Bernie Sanders. Okay. We're going to talk about this in 3 different parts. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the systemic problems that Marianne is going to face. DNC. Second, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of a Marianne Williamson candidacy. And third, we're going to talk about the strategy. What is her strategy? First and foremost, let's start with the pros and the cons. Marianne is good on some issues. There are some issues that she did not support that she has come around on, one of them being Medicare for all. And when she was running in 2020, she did not support Medicare for all. That was not a part of her platform. She said, no, we can't do that. She came around on that issue. In fact, here's a video right before she spoke at the March for Medicare for All, asking people to come out and support the march. Listen to this.
Hey everybody, big news. July 24th, Saturday, Washington, D.C., a big Medicare for All rally, also to be held in 24 cities around the country. Enough is enough. Tens of millions of people, uninsured, underinsured, working at jobs they hate because it's the only way they can get their medical insurance paid for. People who can't afford their insulin. People who are going bankrupt because of medical costs. People who can't afford to even pay for the medicine that their children need for their asthma. This is absolutely unacceptable in a country like ours. It's unnecessary. This is not the way it is in any other advanced democracy. And it's time for we, the people, to make it clear what we want. The polls already show it. The majority of Americans want Medicare for all. But why is it that we don't have it? We know why we don't have it. And that is because short-term profit for health insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies have a louder voice in Washington than we do. So, July 24th, Saturday, Washington, D.C. Let's us go to Washington. I will be speaking there that day, along with others. Let's make a lot of noise. So please look at your calendar, see if it's something that you can make happen. Tell people about it. Go to m4all.org, read up about it, start talking about it, spread the word. We have to make it big. We have to make the kind of noise that even the elected officials in Washington won't be able to avoid hearing. That's what.
Okay, so, and she was there. She was one of the keynote speakers at the March for Medicare for All in DC. She has supported it, you know, even since then. That is something I will say she did change her mind on. So when it comes to the healthcare issue, I feel she's good on that issue. I also feel she's good on the issue of reparations. Now, this is something that a lot of people didn't want to talk about in 2020. She was the one candidate on the debate stage that made reparations her number one thing. And that didn't just start with her presidential campaign. That was something that she's been championing for years before that. She started doing research about reparations back in the early 90s, which a lot of people didn't know about. I knew about that, though. You know why? Because I interviewed her about that. Almost 2 years ago, I interviewed Marianne about that specific issue and just that issue. So you can find this interview on my channel, Reparations Interview with Marianne Williamson. That was earlier on during my show. Listen to what she says here about reparations.
So we were talking about the fact that when people talk about the civil rights movement, sometimes it's spoken about in the context, it's like, this was a long time ago, whereas that was actually only 61 years ago, which really wasn't that long ago. Like when you think about it, what do you think about when you think about like the Jim Crow laws? What do you feel those laws had an effect, or how did they affect white people and Black people even today?
Let me chime in here for just a second to tell you why I brought that up. The reason why I brought that question up is a lot of times when people talk about reparations, they think you're only talking about it in reference to slavery. It's not just in reference to slavery. It's also in reference to the Jim Crow laws. And she goes into detail about that as well. Again, I'll give her props for this. Marianne Williamson has met with ADOS. She has met with people like Dr. Darity. So she has met with people who have done the research. She's helped do research about this as well before she even decided to make that a part of her platform. Listen to this.
Well, okay, the Civil War is over in 1865, right? 1865, and then you have 12 years of Reconstruction. during that time, we saw what was possible, actually. There were Black senators, Black congressmen, et cetera. As soon as and during that time, of course, there were Union soldiers stationed in the South to ensure that slavery would not be reinstituted. As we know, the white racists, and remember, these people had slavery, and they not only had grown up in slavery, but I mean, once again, this is interesting because we now have the psychological and emotional astuteness to like think this through in a whole different way. So I'm raised with slavery. We lose the war. I have nothing. So where's racism going to go? It burrowed down even deeper. So the stroke of a presidential signature or a constitutional amendment could end the external institution of slavery at the time, but it couldn't end racism. Racism burrowed down even deeper. Then you get Ku Klux Klan, et cetera. So once Reconstruction was over, the Black legislatures, as you well know, passed the Black Code laws to ensure subpar economic, political, and social opportunity for Black people, which means that you have 2.5 centuries of slavery followed by another 100 years of institutionalized violence towards Black people in America. Now, I'm 68 years old. I remember, I grew up in Houston. I remember this building that's still there that it's called the Medical Towers building. And I remember we go to the doctor, and in between the bathrooms, there's a sign, colored bathrooms downstairs. And I remember asking my mother, and I remember my parents explaining to me, and my parents were very liberal people. You know, they were very against it, but I remember my parents explaining it. So I remember that time. I was a little girl, but I remember because Dr. King was killed in 1968. I was 16 years old. Teenagers are hip to what's happening. They were hip to what's happening then. Now, in 1964, you have the Civil Rights Act that deconstructed, dismantled segregation. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act, which guaranteed universal voting accessibility, although they've now, since 2013, even been chipping away at that. If Dr. King had lived, there's a third piece of the stool that was simply never accomplished. The argument I would make to people in my campaign is if you've been kicking people for 350 years, that's what we're talking about here. If you've been kicking someone, you owe it to more than help them get back. You owe it to them to do more than stop kicking. You owe it to them as well to help them get back up.
So she's really good on that issue. Like, that is one thing I will say I give her credit for. Deneen said she attended Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore's ADOS conference, and they taught her a lot. Yeah, that is something, like, I will say, I'll give her credit for that. We'll give her credit for that. Mastermind said, I like the new highlights. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's my actual hair color, you guys. That is my actual hair color. Not what you see today. It is weird looking back on that now. That's kind of funny. But great on reparations. She came around on Medicare for all, so she's good on the healthcare issue. You know, we'll get to that in just a second. I want to show you the top moments that she did have during the debates, because she did bring up reparations during the debates as well. So like I said, I think if she goes through with this, she is going to have to, some people are going to tell her this is a mistake, but I think she still needs to make reparations her number one issue. Some people, I'm going to tell you though, some people are going to tell her, no, don't do that, because then you isolating a certain group of people. But she's kind of known for that as her number one thing because of the things she said during the 2020 primary debates. Listen to this.
Flint is just the tip of the iceberg. We have an administration that has gutted the Clean Water Act. We have communities, particularly communities of color and disadvantaged communities all over this country, who are suffering from environmental injustice. If you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. We need to say it like it is. It's bigger than Flint. It's all over this country. It's particularly people of color. It's particularly people who do not have the money to fight back. And if the Democrats don't start saying it, then why would those people feel that they're there for us? And if those people don't feel it, they won't vote for us, and Donald Trump will win.
Many of your opponents support a commission to study the issue of reparations for slavery. But you are calling for up to $500 billion in financial assistance. What makes you qualified to determine how much is owed in reparations?
Well, Don Lemon has got to be the most Uncle Tom. Let me finish. I'm trying to be nice. I'm going to try to be nice. That was just a dumb ass. Obviously, you didn't do your research.
First of all, it's not $500 billion in financial assistance. It's $500 billion, $200 to $500 billion payment of a debt that is owed. That is what reparations is. I'll tell you what makes me qualified. If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War, there were 4 to 5, and they were all promised 40 acres and a mule for every family of 4. If you did the math today, it would be trillions of dollars. And I believe that anything less than $100 billion is an insult. And I believe that 200 to 500 billion is politically feasible today, because so many Americans realize there is an injustice that continues to form a toxicity underneath the surface, an emotional turbulence that only reparations.
Thank you very much. Senator.
See, they try to cut her off there when she's talking about the fact that she had to explain that to Don Lemon. That tells you where Don Lemon he's just there to protect the status quo. Now, those are some of the pros there. Okay. Now we need to get to the cons. Marianne Williamson on foreign policy has not been good. Has not been good. We talked about this on Bad Faith when me, Nick, and CJ went on to Bree's show. And I got to tell you, some of the things I've seen from her via Twitter have not been good. And here's where I stand when it comes with foreign policy. I'm anti-war. I'm anti-imperialist. And if you're not on board with that, I'm not trying to rock with you. When it comes to the situation between Israel and Palestine, if you are against BDS, I'm not trying to rock with you. And I've said this on this show multiple times. Now, why does that have to do with Marianne Williamson? Because some people may not remember this, and this tweet was deleted, but I sure as hell do. Because Marianne Williamson does not support BDS. And I have to show this. And like I said, yes, I've interviewed her before on this show, but I'm telling you the pros and the cons tonight. Now, this is a tweet from Marianne Williamson. This is March 24, 2019. I do not support BDS. And I too love peace. I too love freedom. And I too love human rights. Here's the problem. BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, is a Palestinian-led movement to give the Palestinian people back their human rights. You see what I'm saying? So when you say, and I too love human rights, I don't support BDS, no, those two things don't go together. They don't go together. Again, this tweet has been deleted. But see, people still have screenshots. And so when it comes to her takes on foreign policy, she got to decide where she stands on BDS now. Now it's 2022. So someone was asking me in the chat, I think it was Betsy, Sabby, will you have Marianne on again once she officially announced? I would have her on again, but this time we would have to talk about these foreign policy stances, because it's not just this particular issue. It's the statement that she made about the war in Afghanistan. We got to protect the women and the children. That's the same talking point that you hear from mainstream media. It's never about the women and the children. It's about the resources That's why they're going after those countries. They take resources from those countries. And to hear her make those same kind of talking points when it comes to foreign policy, that is very questionable. Now, let me tell you why it's questionable. Foreign policy, that is the one element where the president of the United States can act alone. They don't necessarily need to get permission from Congress and the Senate. You see why this is a problem? So if you have bad takes on foreign policy and you want to be president of the United States, that's a red flag for me. That is a big red flag. Can't do it. Can't do it. So I can't back anyone who does not support BDS, does not support the Palestinian-led movement. I can't do it, and I won't do it, whether I've interviewed them or not. So the foreign policy takes, very problematic. The second problem, the capitalism issue. Marianne, she'll talk about the problems with poverty. And yes, she's helped people. She has organizations where she's helped people. There was an organization she had called Project AIDS, where she was, I think it was Project Angel Food. She was helping people that were diagnosed with AIDS and HIV. This goes all the way back. Yes, she does help people. But what I noticed is when I hear her talk about these issues, she doesn't link it back to capitalism. And that's the problem. And I feel like for me, if you can't see where what the real problem is, that it's not just the fact that people are poor, excuse me. It's not just the fact that people are poor. It's also the fact that this is what happens when you live in a capitalist system, that under capitalism, the people at the bottom will always be exploited. Without exploitation, there is no capitalism. So for me, if you can't make that connection, that's a problem. And that tells me that you too might be a capitalist. Those two things for me, the foreign policy and the capitalism. Those are big problems for me. Now let's go to that other point, strategy. What is the strategy? Because if she is running through the Democratic Party to primary challenge Joe Biden, is the strategy for Marianne to try to win? Or is the strategy for Marianne to run against Joe Biden and shake things up? Because here's the thing. If she's running against Joe Biden just to shake things up, just like we said should happen with a third party or independent party candidate, then why not just run as an independent or third party candidate? If she is running against Joe Biden to try to actually win, how is she going to be able to fix, and this goes to the other issue, how is she going to be able to fix the systemic issues that she is going to hit up against the same way that Bernie Sanders did? How is Marianne going to respond to the DNC trying to change the rules of the debates just like they did last time? They can change the rules whenever they want. They changed the rules to let Michael Bloomberg debate. Remember? How is Marianne, what is she going to do when it gets to the point where we're talking about the delegates, where you get the super delegates from these states? How is Marianne going to handle, or what is she going to do about them choosing to, maybe if there's a state where there's a tie, the DNC or the super delegates deciding to just go ahead and give it to Joe Biden just because? And I ask this question because that happened with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. How is she going to beat that? How is Marianne going to beat a system in the Democratic Party that has failed Bernie Sanders 2 times in a row? And I ask this question because of this. The support that we had in this country for Bernie Sanders in 2016 and 2020 was a lot. People have split away from that Bernie movement because of what happened 2 times in a row. And because Bernie Sanders told you vote for Hillary, vote for Joe Biden. So Marianne Williamson would have to get even more support than Bernie Sanders got. You guys see what I'm saying? Bernie Sanders had the most money, got the most money from the people, still lost. You know why? DNC came in, Obama came in. They changed the rules, smear campaigns on mainstream media. This is going to happen to her too. I'm just being real. How is she going to beat that if Bernie Sanders, someone who is already a politician, went up against this 2 times in a row and even he couldn't beat it? How is Marianne going to beat that? Then, if she doesn't beat that system and she loses to Joe Biden, is Marianne Williamson going to do the same thing that Bernie Sanders did and tell you to vote for Joe Biden because he's the lesser of 2 evils? Because if that's what is going to happen, then there is no point in her running against Joe Biden. I'm keeping it real. I'm sorry. I'm not going to sugarcoat things for you on this show. In the end, if she loses, and I believe she will, because not necessarily because of her, but because of the system. So when she loses, if the goal for her is to tell you to go ahead and vote for Joe Biden so you don't get Ron DeSantis or a Trump-like figure in there, there is no point in her running against Joe Biden at this point in time. We don't need that to happen again. You want to talk about killing? Yeah, the progressive movement is split, but you want to talk about ending the progressive movement? That's how you end it right there. So what is the strategy? There's that question. How do you beat the system that screwed Bernie Sanders over twice in a row? Unless you move further to the right. Unless you run a less progressive campaign. Unless you run a campaign where you don't go for Medicare for all. You go for access to health care. Unless you run a campaign where you don't necessarily promote reparations, but you talk about we should have a reparations committee. We should research it. So what is the strategy? And you heard the pros and the cons. How do you beat that system? But if she is to run just to shake things up, then she might as well run as an independent or a third party candidate. And if they thought that Bernie was vilified, she's going to be even more vilified. You know why? Because last time there was no Democrat incumbent. Last time in 2020, when all those candidates were running for office, there was no sitting Democrat president. The sitting president was a Republican. So if people thought they came after Bernie, how do you think they're going to come after Marianne Williamson? And she's running against the sitting president who is a Democrat and she's running the Democratic Party. Keeping it real for you. But what did you guys think? Let's go ahead and see that poll, Eric. How do you guys feel about this and how would you vote? So the poll, we have 577 votes. Would you vote for Marianne Williamson if she ran in 2024? 6% of you said yes if she ran as a Democrat. 33% of you said yes only if independent or third party. Wow, these changed. 39% of you said no for Democrat, Indy, or third party. And 22% of you said you are not sure. Someone should take a picture of this. When I looked at this before, yes, only if Indy or third party was actually a lot higher. But it seems like most of you are saying no, regardless.